This video is sponsored by OWC. For the longest time, I've been looking for a monitor that I can use for two purposes. One for work when I'm at home, and one for console gaming that takes advantage of these next-gen consoles' 4K 120Hz feature via HDMI 2.1. Obviously, the goal is to find something that fits those needs and spend as little money as possible, and there really aren't that many options out there. I've actually only found two, and one of them being the Eve Spectrum 4K monitor. Eve is a company that crowdsources its items, but in exchange, it basically allows for its own customers and, followers of the company to sort of build its dream device. And in this setup, it's a relatively affordable monitor with some higher end features. The elephant in the room here with most crowdsourced companies, and Eve is no different than most of them out there, is that they're really not killing it in the shipping department. But as of right now, monitors are actually starting to finally ship out to people who've placed an order a long time ago. And so we're finally gonna go hands-on and give you my first initial impressions of this monitor. Now, I know I said this is the 4K Eve Spectrum monitor, but it actually comes in three variations. A QHD 144Hz version for $459, a QHD 240Hz version for $609, and then the model that we have here, it's the 4K 144Hz for $799. All three options do not include the stand for the monitor, which is an additional $99. Now, I know I'm gonna hear stand jokes about, like the Pro Display XDR. Well, that was $1,000 and this is only $99, but still, the reason behind this is that Eve states 46% of its community members wanted to have an option to buy the monitor without the stand and use a VESA arm instead, which the mount for that is included. Fair enough, I'll give them a pass if that's actually true. I have no way of actually knowing that that's what their community really wanted, but that does mean this pushes the price of each monitor in this range here from $550 to $899 plus tax. So the one that I have here is pushing nearly $1,000. So it's not the cheapest option in the world, but when it comes to those specs that I mentioned before, specifically HDMI 2.1, there are little to no other options at this price point at the time of filming. There is one monitor that I do actually own. It's from Gigabyte and it is cheaper, and we'll get into more of that later. But as far as build quality for this specific monitor and the design goes, it's actually really nice. The stand, despite it being an additional $99, is made up of premium materials and metal. It's very sturdy, very heavy, definitely not worried about the stand being too cheap or flimsy. It also allows for full rotation and tons of range for height and tilt adjustment. Now, again, if you don't want to use a VESA mount, it might be a bit of a bummer to fork up another $99. The stand is probably worth the price for how good the quality of the stand actually is. Now, the rest of the design is also pretty clean. It's very minimal and just all around subtle, especially for a gaming monitor. That's not something that you'll come across very often. It's a sleek monitor. It's also 27 inches in size, which is, of course, a good sweet spot for gaming, but as well as just getting things done for work. Now, my initial impressions of the display from a work standpoint, and I have been using the Pro Display XDR, so I am very spoiled, but if I just remove that other monitor from the equation, it's actually really good. The IPS display does lead to some more natural and accurate color accuracy, and it's just good for viewing angles, and there is going to be a little bit of light bleed with the blacks, and the contrast is just not as good as some of the other monitors at this price point, but it's also a bottom-lit IPS panel, so I'm not really expecting a whole lot there in terms of just the contrast and the black levels, and you are gonna get light bleed from the bottom more, prominently than any other spot on the monitor. You're probably thinking that the light bleed is really bad in this clip. I think the camera is not doing it any justice and blowing that out of proportion here. Where you are seeing that bad light bleed here in the bottom left, that is where most of it is at, but it's not as bad as this camera is making it seem. I have used my MacBook Pro connected via USB-C, and I've also used my Mac Pro, but unfortunately it is not Thunderbolt, so just something to keep in mind here. But there are no shortage of ports, that's for sure. The thing is loaded with one display port, two HDMI 2.1 ports, two USB-C ports, two USB Type-A ports, and one USB Type-B port alongside an auxiliary port for audio. The amount of ports available kind of limits the need for having a hub, which is nice because Even though there isn't Thunderbolt USB-C port, it's still power delivery at 100 watts, which is great for charging. Now, most people watching this are probably interested in the gaming aspect because that's what it is heavily marketed towards. And so again, I wanted it for both work and gaming because I don't game a lot, but I do play one game. I've mentioned this a lot. It's Call of Duty Warzone on my Xbox, and I really wanted something with HDMI 2.1 so that I could get 4K 120 hertz on my Series X. And having that option is fantastic. It's really good for games like Warzone. Everything is buttery smooth, and I think it really takes advantage of the game's HDR capabilities as well, as everything is super sharp, crisp, and extreme high contrast and brightness. For peak brightness areas, you can really tell that it's doing a great job. I was really impressed with just how good everything looked, and being able to play with that 120 hertz on my Xbox is just a really cool experience, and about as good as it's going to get for us console gamers, as opposed to those on PC who can get those high frame rates. So if you're into shooter games or anything that needs some buttery smooth performance, you're gonna like this. Now, the biggest bummer that I've had during testing, and again, this is just something that I think is hyper specific to my hardware here, is that the monitor kept cutting out the video feed at the worst times. I'm not sure if it was the cable or that specific port on the monitor. I've tested it with a different Xbox and I've tested it with my PS5 and everything worked well, but with my Series X, I've had some issues, and I'm gonna do a follow-up and play more games. I'm gonna get a different cable that's gonna take advantage of the 4K 120 hertz. But as of right now, it was just absolutely awful. Anytime somebody approached me and I was about to get into a gunfight, it literally would go black and then it would come back and I'm dead, and it was awful. Aside from that issue, which is again probably something super specific to me, this monitor has been great. And while $900 isn't cheap for a monitor, again, if you look at all the other options that have these specs, and specifically HDMI 2.1, there's not a lot under that $1,000 price point. I did mention that there's one from Gigabyte that I did purchase a few months ago, and that's also a really fantastic monitor. But this EVE Spectrum has a bit more clarity and sharpness, and it's much better at 4K HDR compared to the Gigabyte monitor. Now again, I really like that monitor, and it was only $599. So if you don't care about 4K HDR and you don't really care about anything else besides getting HDMI 2.1 at the cheapest, I'd probably recommend that Gigabyte monitor because it's pretty readily available. But look at EVE as a whole. There are the QHD models for around the same price, if not cheaper than that other one that I just mentioned. So it might be worth going that route or checking those out. But I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you want to see a full review on this monitor or something specific to console gaming, or even games on my Mac, which I did try out a little bit, but it's not anything different than any other monitor out there. It's still a very good experience. Let me know in those comments down below. And before we end today's video, I do want to give you more information about today's sponsor, OWC. OWC has tons of products for your Mac, and earlier this year they launched the incredible OWC Envoy Pro Electron SSD. This is OWC's fastest and toughest mini-sized USB-C bus-powered drive that the company offers, and it's super fast. The drive touts incredible real-world performance due to it being powered by OWC's Aura SSD, offering users super fast transfer speeds. It's incredibly small and can fit in your pocket easily, but it's also built like an absolute tank. Even though it boasts a lot of power, it's still really cool under the hood thanks to that aircraft-grade aluminum housing that really helps dissipate the heat. And for more information about the new Envoy Pro Electron or anything else that OWC has to offer, click the link in the description down below. This has been Dan with Mac Rumors. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you around in the next video.